It was supposed to be just another school day, but for 8-year-old Maya and her father, Eric, this morning would change everything. Eric had always been a protective father. He made sure Maya knew how to stand up for herself, how to recognize danger, and most importantly, how to speak up when something didn't feel right. But when Maya stepped off the school bus that afternoon, her small face tight with worry, he knew something was wrong before she even said a word. She hesitated for a moment, gripping the straps of her little backpack, eyes darting around as if making sure no one else could hear. Then, in a quiet but firm voice, she said, "The bus driver did it again." Eric's stomach dropped. Again. His mind raced, heart pounding in his chest. He crouched down to her level, searching her face for answers. "What do you mean, baby? What happened?" Maya's lips pressed together, and for a second, it looked like she might cry. But she was strong, just like her daddy had taught her. She took a deep breath and whispered, "He looked at me through the mirror the whole ride. And when I got off, he said something weird again." Eric felt his hands clench into fists. He had noticed something off about that bus driver before, Mr. Reynolds, a man in his late 50s with thinning hair and tired eyes. The first time Maya mentioned something strange, Eric had brushed it off as nothing. Maybe the man was just friendly. Maybe Maya had misunderstood. But now, again. His chest tightened. There was no maybe anymore. Eric stood up, grabbed his phone, and without another second of hesitation, dialed 911. What had this man said to his daughter? What had he done before? And more importantly, how long had this been happening? As the phone rang in his ear, Eric's mind flooded with worst-case scenarios. But one thing was certain. Whatever was going on, it was about to end today. Eric's hands were shaking as he held the phone to his ear. The operator's voice came through almost immediately. 911, what's your emergency? He took a breath, trying to keep his voice steady, but the anger and fear inside him made it impossible. "It's my daughter, her school bus driver. Something isn't right," he said, his voice tight. "She just got home and told me, he's been acting strange around her. I don't know exactly what he's doing, but I need someone to check this out. I need to know my baby is safe." Maya stood beside him, small fingers gripping the hem of his shirt. She wasn't crying, but her little shoulders were tense, and her eyes flickered with something that made Eric's heart ache, fear. His baby girl should never have to feel afraid. The operator's voice was calm but serious. "Sir, can you tell me exactly what happened?" Eric looked down at Maya. He didn't want to make her repeat it again, but this was important. He crouched in front of her, holding the phone away from his ear for a moment. "Maya, sweetheart, I know it's hard, but I need you to tell me everything. What did he do? What did he say?" She hesitated, chewing on her bottom lip. Then, in a small voice, she whispered, "He called me pretty." Eric's jaw tightened. He forced himself to stay calm. "When did he say that?" "When I got off the bus." She looked up at him, eyes wide. And he smiled weird. A cold feeling settled in Eric's chest. A grown man, a school bus driver, should not be telling an 8-year-old girl that. "He's been watching me in the mirror a lot," she continued. "And last week, he said something too. He said he liked my hair." She touched her braids as she spoke. "And before I got off the bus, he said, 'See you tomorrow, beautiful.'" Eric felt his breath catch in his throat. He had let this go on too long. He had ignored the first warning sign, thinking maybe he was just being overprotective. Never again. He put the phone back to his ear. "Did you hear that?" he asked the operator. "Yes, sir," she responded, her voice more serious now. "I'm dispatching an officer to your location. Do you have any other concerns about this man? Has your daughter mentioned anything else?" Eric ran a hand over his face. "Not yet, but I need someone to talk to him. I need to know if there's more to this." I don't trust him around those kids. Understood, sir. An officer will be there soon. Eric hung up, his heart still racing. He looked down at Maya, brushing a gentle hand over her hair. You did the right thing telling me, baby. I'm so proud of you. She nodded but still looked uneasy. Am I in trouble? No, never. He pulled her into a hug. You're safe now, okay? But even as he said it, doubt crept into his mind. Was she really safe? Or had this been going on longer than he realized? Eric stood up, pacing the living room as he waited for the police. He couldn't stop his mind from going in circles. Had other parents noticed anything strange? Had any other kids mentioned him acting weird? Was Maya the only one? He grabbed his phone again, this time opening the parents' group chat for her school. He started typing. Hey, parents, I need to ask if anyone has noticed anything weird about bus driver Reynolds. My daughter just told me some things that don't sit right with me. Anyone else have concerns? He hit send and waited. Seconds later, a reply popped up. What kind of weird? Then another. I don't like him either. My son said he stares at the girls too much. Eric's stomach twisted. Another message appeared. I thought it was just me. My daughter said he always looks at her in the mirror too. Eric felt his grip tighten on the phone. How had no one reported this before? How long had this man been getting away with making these kids uncomfortable? A knock at the door made him jump. He set his phone down and opened it. A uniformed officer stood on the porch, a notepad in hand. Mr. Thompson, the officer asked. Yes, that's me. I understand there's a concern about your daughter's school bus driver. Eric nodded and stepped aside. Come in. My daughter just told me something today, but now I'm seeing other parents say they've noticed things too. The officer stepped inside, glancing down at Maya with a kind expression. Hi there, sweetheart. I just want to ask you a few questions, okay? Maya hesitated, looking up at Eric. He gave her a reassuring nod, and she finally whispered, okay. The officer knelt to her level. Can you tell me what happened? Maya repeated everything, the staring, the comments, the uncomfortable feeling in her stomach every time she got on that bus. The officer wrote everything down carefully. When she finished, he looked at Eric. Do you have any footage? Maybe a doorbell camera that records when she gets off the bus. Eric's heart leapt. Actually, I might. He hurried to his phone, opening the app connected to his front porch camera. He scrolled through the footage, his hands shaking slightly. Then he found it, the video from yesterday. He pressed play. The black and white footage showed the school bus pulling up. The door swung open, and Maya stepped down the stairs. And then, clear as day, the bus driver leaned slightly toward the door and watched her, his mouth moved. Even without sound, Eric knew exactly what part this was. See you tomorrow, beautiful. Eric felt his skin crawl. The officer leaned in, watching closely. I'll need to take a copy of this. Eric nodded, his jaw tight. Take whatever you need. I just want this man away from my daughter. The officer took a deep breath. I'll be making a visit to the school and speaking with the transportation department. In the meantime, I'd suggest you don't let your daughter ride that bus. Eric looked at Maya, who was hugging her stuffed animal tightly. He had already made that decision the second she told him what happened. She's never getting on that bus again, he said firmly. But even as he said it, he knew this wasn't over. Because now, there was one question burning in his mind. What else had this man done that no one knew about? Eric barely slept that night. He kept checking on Maya, peeking into her room every few hours just to make sure she was okay. She had fallen asleep clutching her stuffed bunny, her small body curled up beneath the blankets. She looked peaceful, but Eric knew better. His little girl had been scared today. And that wasn't something he could just forget. Downstairs, his phone sat on the coffee table, still buzzing with messages from the parents' group chat. More people had spoken up. More parents had started sharing things they had brushed off before, things that didn't feel like much at the time but now, put together, painted a picture of something that made Eric's stomach twist. One mom said her daughter had mentioned feeling weird around Mr. Reynolds but hadn't been able to explain why. Another parent said their son had noticed the bus driver always smiled too much at certain girls. A dad mentioned he once saw the man staring as the kids got off the bus, like he was studying them. Why hadn't anyone said anything before? Eric ran a hand over his face. He knew the answer. Because it had been small things. Little moments that didn't seem like enough to make a big deal out of. Until now. Now, it was clear. Something was very wrong. The next morning, Eric called the school before Maya even woke up. The secretary answered, her voice polite but tired, as if she had already dealt with too many problems that day. Jefferson Elementary, how can I help you? This is Eric Thompson. I need to speak with whoever is in charge of transportation. It's about bus driver Reynolds. There was a pause. Then, a hesitant, hold, please. A minute later, a new voice came on the line. Mr. Thompson, this is Mrs. Carter. I oversee student transportation. I understand you have a concern. Eric let out a slow breath, trying to keep his voice steady. It's more than a concern. My daughter, along with other kids, has been uncomfortable around Mr. Reynolds. He's been watching them too closely, saying things he shouldn't. I even have video footage of him acting strange when she gets off the bus. The woman on the other end didn't respond right away. Then she sighed. Mr. Thompson, I understand your worry, but Mr. Reynolds has been with our district for over 20 years. We've never had a complaint against him. Eric clenched his jaw. Of course. Of course, they'd defend him. Maybe no one complained because they didn't realize what was happening, he said, trying to keep his frustration in check. But now, parents are speaking up. There's a pattern here. Mrs. Carter hesitated. We take all concerns seriously. I'll look into it. That wasn't good enough. Not even close. With all due respect, Eric said, his voice firm, looking into it isn't enough. I need to know my daughter and every other child on that bus is safe. Are you going to let him keep driving in the meantime? Another pause. I'll review the footage you have, she finally said. Please send it to my office. Eric knew that was just a way to buy time. But he sent the video anyway, along with screenshots of the parents' messages. Then, without waiting for a response, he grabbed his keys. Because talking wasn't enough anymore. He was going to the school. By the time he arrived, other parents were already gathering outside. The group chat had done its job, people were paying attention now. A few mothers were talking in hushed voices, while a father stood off to the side, arms crossed tightly. Eric walked up, his presence immediately drawing their attention. Did anyone hear back from the school yet? He asked. One of the moms shook her head. Nothing useful. They said they're investigating. The dad scoffed. That means they're waiting for this to blow over. Eric knew he was right. Schools hated bad publicity. They'd rather let time pass and hope people moved on. Not this time. As they stood there, a school administrator came out, clearly uncomfortable. She held up her hands in a placating gesture. We hear your concerns. I promise, we're reviewing the situation. Eric stepped forward. Is he still driving the bus? The woman hesitated. At this time, Mr. Reynolds is continuing his route, but... That was all Eric needed to hear. Unacceptable, he snapped. You're telling me that after multiple parents came forward, after I sent you footage, you're still letting him drive kids to school? We can't just remove an employee without a full investigation, she said. Then investigate. Quickly. Before something worse happens, a mother added. The administrator looked flustered. If you have additional concerns, I encourage you to speak directly with the district office. Eric took a step closer. Trust me, I will. The administrator nodded stiffly and hurried back inside. Eric turned to the parents. We're not letting this go. Heads nodded. Voices murmured in agreement. But as he stood there, one thought nagged at him. If this was what they knew now, what hadn't they uncovered yet? Eric wasn't waiting around to find out. He pulled out his phone and dialed again. This time, he wasn't calling 911. He was calling a reporter. The phone rang twice before a voice picked up. This is Lisa Torres, Channel 9 News. Eric didn't hesitate. My name is Eric Thompson. I have a story for you, one you'll want to hear. There was a pause. Go on. Eric took a deep breath, keeping his voice steady even though every nerve in his body was on edge. It's about a school bus driver, one who's been making kids uncomfortable for who knows how long. The school won't act, even though parents have spoken up. I have video footage. I have messages from other parents. And if they won't do something about it, maybe you will. Lisa was silent for a moment, and then her tone shifted, more serious. Send me everything you have. Eric quickly forwarded the video and screenshots. Within minutes, she called back. This is disturbing, she said. I'll reach out to the school for comment. But tell me, do you think this has been going on longer than just recently? Eric clenched his jaw. I think so. I think he's been doing this for years. We just didn't put the pieces together until now. Lisa sighed. This is big. I need more parents to speak up on record. If they do, I can push this story out. Eric glanced around at the group of parents still standing outside the school. I'll get you people to talk. As soon as he hung up, he turned to the group. A reporter wants to cover this. She needs parents willing to go on record. A few people exchanged nervous glances. One mom shifted on her feet. Do you think that's a good idea? Eric's frustration boiled over. Do I think it's a good idea? I think we have a man driving our children every day who's making them uncomfortable, and the school is dragging their feet. If we don't speak up, who will? Silence. Then the dad who had been standing quietly before finally stepped forward. I'll talk. One by one, hands went up. The anger was spreading now, not just frustration, but real determination. Eric nodded. Good. Because we're not backing down. As the parents organized statements, Eric checked his phone. Another message popped up in the group chat, from a woman he didn't recognize. You need to check the records. Mr. Reynolds worked at another school before this one. Eric's pulse jumped. He quickly typed back. What school? A moment later, she replied. Brookside Elementary. My niece went there. We had concerns back then too. Eric's stomach twisted. He opened his browser and started searching. A few minutes later, he found it. A small news article, buried in the archives. Longtime school bus driver retires early amid complaints. Eric clicked on it, scanning the text. No details. No accusations. Just a vague mention of concerns from parents and how the district had allowed the driver to leave quietly. Mr. Reynolds had worked there. And just a few months later, he started driving for Maya's school. Eric's breath caught in his throat. This wasn't new. This was a pattern. His hands shook as he forwarded the article to Lisa. Seconds later, she called. This changes everything, she said, her voice tight. We need to talk, now. Eric glanced back at the school. He wasn't waiting anymore. The truth was about to come out. Eric gripped his phone, his heart pounding. The realization hit him like a punch: this man had been pushed out before. Not fired, not exposed, just quietly moved. And now, he had been driving Maya's bus for months, maybe even longer, slipping under the radar again. Lisa's voice came through the phone, urgent and serious. "Eric, I've seen cases like this before. Schools don't want bad press, so they push problematic staff out instead of dealing with them. But the fact that he resurfaced here? That's negligence." Eric nodded, even though she couldn't see him. "This means the district knew something, doesn't it?" "I'd bet on it," Lisa said. "And if they knew, that means there are documents. Records. Something we can find." Eric exhaled sharply. He wasn't sure how deep this went, but if the school district had been covering for this man, then this was bigger than just one bad bus driver. A voice called his name. He looked up. It was another parent, a woman he didn't recognize. She was holding her phone tightly, her face pale. "You need to see this," she said. Eric stepped closer, and she turned her screen toward him. A new message had just come through the parent group chat. It was from an unknown number. "Stop. You don't know what you're getting into." Eric felt a chill run down his spine. "Who sent that?" The woman shook her head. "No idea. But whoever it is, they don't want us digging." Eric's pulse quickened. This wasn't just some misunderstanding anymore. Someone was watching. He turned back to his phone, his grip tightening. "Lisa, we need to move fast. Someone's trying to scare us off." Lisa was quiet for a second, then said, "Let them try. We're getting to the bottom of this." Eric looked around at the parents, their faces now a mix of determination and unease. He had started this fight to protect Maya. But now, it was bigger than just his daughter. This was about every child that had ever stepped onto that bus. And if someone thought they could scare him into backing down, they were about to find out just how wrong they were. Eric knew there was no turning back now. The unknown message was proof that someone wanted to keep this quiet. But instead of scaring him, it fueled his determination. He wasn't going to let fear silence the truth. That night, Lisa called him again. "I spoke with someone from Brookside Elementary," she said. "A former administrator. Off the record, they admitted that Reynolds was let go because multiple parents complained about him making children uncomfortable. But there was no formal investigation. The district let him retire early." Eric clenched his jaw. "And then they just handed him a new job at Maya's school." Lisa sighed. "It gets worse. I pulled his employment records. There was a complaint at Jefferson Elementary too, last year. A parent reported inappropriate behavior. But the school dismissed it because there was no solid proof." Eric's stomach dropped. "Then why is he still driving?" "Because nobody forced them to act," Lisa said. "Until now." Eric's hands tightened into fists. He wasn't waiting for the school to do the right thing. He was going to make them. The next morning, he and the other parents gathered outside the district office. This time, they weren't just talking, they were demanding action. Signs were raised. Voices grew louder. The news crew arrived, cameras rolling. And finally, the district had no choice but to send someone out. A tall man in a suit, the superintendent, stepped forward. "We are aware of the concerns raised," he began, his tone controlled. "We take student safety very seriously, Anne." Eric cut him off. If you took it seriously, he wouldn't still be driving. Murmurs of agreement rippled through the crowd. Lisa stepped in. "We have records of previous complaints. We know he was let go from another school. So why is he still employed here?" The superintendent's face tensed. He glanced toward the cameras, clearly realizing that this wasn't just a few angry parents, it was a public scandal in the making. Mr. Reynolds has been placed on administrative leave, effective immediately, pending a full investigation, he finally said. Eric narrowed his eyes. That wasn't enough. Another parent spoke up. That's not good enough. He should be fired. The superintendent hesitated. The district will follow all legal protocols. Eric took a step forward. If you don't, we will. And we won't stop until this school is held accountable for protecting him instead of our kids. The cameras caught every word. And just like that, the pressure became too much. Within hours, the district released a statement announcing that Reynolds was officially terminated. An internal review was launched, investigating how he had been rehired despite previous concerns. The parents had won. But just as Eric felt the weight lift off his shoulders, Lisa called him one last time. There's something you should know, she said. I kept digging. Eric's breath caught. What did you find? Lisa hesitated. Then she said, Reynolds wasn't just quietly moved here. Someone in the district helped him get this job. Eric's heart pounded. Who? Lisa exhaled. We don't have a name yet. But someone signed off on his transfer. Someone covered for him. A cold chill ran down Eric's spine. He had thought the fight was over. But now, he realized, it was just beginning. Eric stood outside the district office, watching as the last of the news crews packed up their equipment. The fight wasn't over, not completely, but for the first time in days, he felt like something had shifted. The weight pressing down on his chest wasn't as heavy. The parents had won a battle today. Reynolds was gone. The school was scrambling to save face. And now, there were questions they couldn't ignore. But Lisa's words echoed in his mind. Someone helped him get this job. Someone covered for him. That part of the fight was still unfinished. He felt a small hand slip into his. Maya stood beside him, looking up with wide, tired eyes. Daddy, does this mean he won't be driving anymore? Eric knelt down, squeezing her hand gently. No, baby. He's never driving you, or anyone else, again. Maya blinked, relief flickering across her face. But then her little brows scrunched together. But, who let him drive in the first place? Eric swallowed hard. That was the question, wasn't it? He had uncovered the what, but now, he had to figure out the who. That night, after tucking Maya into bed, Eric sat at his kitchen table, scrolling through emails from Lisa. She had managed to get partial records from the district, but a name was still missing. Someone high up had signed off on Reynolds' transfer, brushing past whatever complaints had followed him. A message popped up in the parents' group chat. It was from an unknown number again. You got what you wanted. Drop it now. Eric's jaw clenched. Someone was still trying to shut him up. But they didn't understand, this wasn't just about one man anymore. It was about the people who let him in. The next morning, Lisa called. I have a lead, she said, her voice tense. It's bigger than we thought. Eric exhaled slowly. Tell me. Lisa hesitated. The person who approved his hire. It wasn't some random HR mistake. It was someone who knew exactly what they were doing. Eric leaned forward, gripping the phone tighter. His hiring was pushed through by a district administrator. Someone who had been with the school board for years. And guess what? That same person worked at Brookside Elementary when Reynolds was there. Eric felt his stomach drop. Lisa continued, they moved him once. Then they moved him again. When complaints came in, they swept them under the rug. Eric's mind was racing. Who? Lisa sighed. Her name is Deborah Harris. She's one of the senior officials in the district's transportation department. Eric didn't recognize the name, but that didn't matter. What mattered was that she had known. She had been part of the reason Reynolds was allowed near children again. "What do we do now?" Eric asked. Lisa's voice was steady. "We expose her." The next day, the story broke. This time, it wasn't just about a bus driver, it was about a system that had protected him. Lisa's report went live, naming Deborah Harris as the official who had repeatedly ignored red flags and quietly reassigned Reynolds instead of addressing the complaints against him. Emails were uncovered. Internal memos. Proof that she had fast-tracked his application despite concerns. The district scrambled. Within hours, Harris was placed on leave pending an internal review. Parents were outraged. Calls flooded into the school board, demanding accountability. And finally, at a press conference, the superintendent publicly apologized. "We failed to take the concerns of parents seriously," he admitted, standing stiffly behind a podium. "We are launching a full investigation into our hiring policies and procedures." It wasn't a perfect victory, but it was something. A crack in the system that couldn't be ignored anymore. A week later, Eric picked Maya up from school himself. The air felt lighter. The worried whispers at the bus stop had faded. Things weren't perfect, but at least parents knew they had a voice. Maya climbed into the car, buckling her seatbelt with a small smile. "Daddy?" "Yeah, baby." She looked at him, her little eyes full of something he hadn't seen in days: peace. "You fixed it." Eric swallowed hard. "Not just me. A lot of people." She nodded. "But you didn't stop. Even when they told you to." Eric reached over, brushing a strand of hair from her face. "Because that's what you do when something isn't right. You don't stop until it is." Maya thought about that for a moment, then smiled. "Okay." Eric smiled back. "Okay." As he pulled away from the school, he let out a slow breath. It wasn't the ending he had expected. But it was the ending they needed. And that was enough.